What's up, everybody? Brothers, sisters, psychonauts, and seekers of truth. It is Ananka, and welcome to my bazaar. Today, I have a Peyote trip report for you. The title of this trip report is The Hallucinations Are Real? And was submitted to Earowid in 2007 by the user .357. With all that being said, let our story begin. It was a nice Saturday evening in late June. Stashed away in my room were 8 peyote buttons and an 1/8 ounce of mushrooms, all of which was to be split between my friend Brian and I. This would be my second time with mushrooms, but the peyote was foreign to me, and I was to take both, along with smoking a hefty sum of cannabis. The first time I took mushrooms, it was 1/16 of an ounce, the same amount taken on this trip. I saw mild hallucinations, including the infamous shifting floor. But I thought they were just that, hallucinations. This trip proved to be more than just a trip. It turned out to be an eye-opener to what's really floating around out there. 6 p.m. We ingested the peyote, which I ground up the best I could so it would metabolize faster. The peyote had too much of a barky texture that couldn't be pulverized into powder with pestle and mortar. The small pieces were much too bitter to chew up, so I had to swallow mine down with water. Brian had to eat his with pizza, because he couldn't even handle swallowing it with water. We planned to trip hard during the late hours, and took it so early for 2 reasons. One was upon hearing peyote takes a really long time to kick in, and the other was if it made us vomit, we would still have the shrooms to look forward to. 9:45 p.m. 4 hours later, and I had only felt a head change, which had been an hour before. We had practically given our hopes up in the thought that peyote was doing nothing to us. We smoked a bowl at the park and took the mushrooms. Then we walked over to another park, which I had bad feelings about. All these bright baseball lights were on from a Little League game, so I felt a little more comfortable. After a cigarette, Brian wanted to smoke more weed. I didn't want to because I knew it would make me paranoid, but I ended up doing so anyway. This park is a hot zone for pigs, so we walked toward the wooded area of the park to get away from the baseball field lights. Right then, the lights shut off, and we were in darkness. Paranoia surged through my veins and my heart rate increased. We immediately walked back toward a bathroom with a dim light to smoke by. We smoked 2 bowls, which literally took forever. And all the time while I was smoking, my mind was set on just getting home. 10:45 p.m. I was hopeless and paranoid at that moment. We walked into Dairy Queen for a couple of waters, and right then I felt the drugs beginning to take hold. The room began to glow and pulse. I had a very hard time ordering a simple free water. Once we left, I knew I was in a pickle. My mom usually expects me home around 11 o'clock, and I looked way too high to confront her, with my droopy, dark, dilated eyes. I also knew that it was only going to get worse from here on out. Our best bet was to go home before it got worse. 11:15 p.m. I arrived home. Lucky for me, my mom was in bed reading. I quickly locked the door, said goodnight to my mom, and went to my room with Brian before she could even see us. It was a big relief for me, and the fear slowly began to settle. My room looked the same as it did the first time I did shrooms. It was glowing a bright haze, and the geometric patterns were shifting on my floor. But something wasn't right, though. Everything just seemed to be overloaded. I wasn't tripped out. There was just this feeling I had that there was too much shit going on, and I couldn't comprehend what it was or why I felt this way. Being at the park just triggered a switch for what I thought would be an all-night bad trip. 11:30 p.m. Only 15 minutes had gone by, and it felt like it had been 2 hours. The peyote and mushrooms suddenly worked together to kick me in the nuts with full force. I went from mild paranoid feelings to a full force of paranoia and bad vibes. I knew I could make it pass with complete silence and tranquility in my room for about 10 minutes. That was not the case. Brian kept moving about the room, talking too much and wanted me to get food for him. I kept explaining to him over and over to stop talking, stop moving around the room, and stop asking me for things. It fell upon deaf ears. He can be completely worthless when he is under the influence sometimes. My bad energy was on a meter in the negative side that was very slowly drifting toward the positive side. Every time Brian said or did anything, it would jerk me back further down the negative side. Once I reached the positive side of the meter, I wouldn't go back to the negative side. Brian was not allowing this to happen. 12 a.m. Lost in the space-time continuum. Brian finally stopped after a half hour of me constantly pestering him. I sat quietly in my chair, slouched over with my head in my hands. The overloads of thoughts and randomness began to settle faster than I expected. The mood of my room started to change and became very comforting. The same geometric patterns were still shifting on my floor, but they weren't a bother. I looked over at Brian, and we both knew by each other's stare that somehow we were in the same state of perception. We proceeded to zone out in trances for several minutes. We were interrupted by Brian's cell ringing, so I went to the bathroom, sat on the toilet, and watched the floor shift around. Noises started to run through my head. The shag rug on the floor began to sway back and forth to an aquatic fantasy melody, which gave off strong vibes of being underwater. There was also a faint conversation going on between two people. I left to go back to my bedroom, and Brian had the look of oblivion. Everything was strange, yet manageable. We decided to have a nice bowl, or two. This is where my entire perception on the essential nature of a trip was completely altered. After 2 bowls, shit got intense. I wasn't scared, but I knew something was going on in my room other than illusion. The noises in my head grew louder. Brian had the, I don't know, look upon his face. So I turned off all of the lights except a dim blue fish lamp, so things couldn't get too scary, and began talking with him. "Are you hearing voices?" I asked. "I don't know. I really just don't know how to explain what's going on," he replied. "Wait. Just be quiet and listen." So we listened in silence, and sure enough, noises started to emerge. The noises weren't clear, and I could only repeat the tone. As I started repeating the first things I heard, Brian looked at me in shock. "No fucking way," he said. We kept listening and took turns repeating what we heard. The noises ranged from little girls laughing, to conversations, to tunes and knocking. There was too much going on to explain it all. Then a jumble of images began to appear in my head. The first thing that appeared was a row of water wheels. I asked Brian what he saw, and it was the exact same thing. We then closed our eyes and began telling each other what we saw. Christ, things got really crazy at this point. All these images of multicolored patterns, places, and tunnels began to appear. Brian and I continued to describe the things that we saw simultaneously. There was even Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man holding Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon prism. What did all of this stuff mean? I had no clue, but I knew I wanted more. We decided to go a little deeper with another bowl. While smoking, the noises became louder. At one point, while holding in a hit, I heard someone coughing. Right after that, I coughed my lungs out. I knew one of those bastards somehow knew I was going to cough and mocked me for it. After that bowl, something happened that I did not expect. I could now feel what was going on. The room began to glow very bright, then dim down. It seemed like these waves of energy were coming in from one corner and leaving the other. As they came in, my body temperature would rise, accompanied by tingly burning sensations. The vibes in my room constantly changed from positive to negative. As the energy shifted, my body temperature shifted back and forth from cold shivers to burning hot. At one point, it felt like my body was completely covered in icy hot. Crazy? Yes. But the fact that Brian was all the while feeling the very same thing is even crazier. An unknown while later, I began to come down. Wrong. When I just got done cursing in disappointment, my room turned gray, and there were these little tiki savages dancing on my closet door. The trip continued forward for the rest of the night, constantly shifting in moods without affecting my own. My conclusion on my fraudulent come down is that not too many things from the other side happened to be passing through at that moment. This happened to me before with another friend on a DXM trip. We just seemed to abruptly come down at the same time. I didn't know what to think of it then. But after this trip, I knew why. Another conclusion I've come to is about my room. My room is a spiritual portal, more so than other places in my house. My closet is the worst. My same friend, who I abruptly came down off of DXM with, said he kicked a giant stone soldier that was coming out of the closet during a different DXM trip. He also said there were skeletons constantly peeking out, and whenever he'd look over, they'd quickly hide. I laughed at the whole thing and thought he was just tripping hard. During another time he was over, we smoked salvia, and he said the giant stone bastard came back again. Not to worry, he said. I crushed him into a little ball and lit him on fire. What a fucking nutcase. A nutcase who saw something I couldn't up until the night of this experience. When Brian told me we needed to close my closet door, I knew that my other friend was right about a stone soldier trying to get him. My closet has some very bad vibrations coming out of it. It's probable that all the noir ambiance appearing that night came out of my closet. Chills ran up my spine, and a strong sense of something angry watching me was present when I opened the door. The door remained closed for the rest of the night, and continues to stay closed at nighttime to this day. Typical children who are scared of the so-called boogeyman in the closet may be damn well scared for a reason. Something I had no understanding of before, even though I experienced some of these same troubles as a youth. The trip finally wore off somewhere around 5 in the morning. When Brian had enough of it all, he went to sleep. I decided to take my mind off all of the shit with a little TV. My head eventually straightened out, and I was able to fall asleep around 6 a.m., but not before receiving a final message. End of report. It was my most insightful trip to date, and I plan on having many more. Conclusion. We saw, heard, and yes, even felt the same of everything 100% of the time while inquiring each other about it. These visions are not something that even two people spending their entire lives together could possibly imagine by coincidence. The most occurring images were the tunnels in all sorts of different geometric shapes. These patterns seem to be the main thing about every hallucinogenic experience. I don't know what meaning they have, but they must have one. Brian and I were even able to coincide the color combinations of these patterns. My most memorable visions were scenes from the 1800s and a clear image of an alien appearing on my wall. The only way to explain the way I picked these visions up is through a sixth sense. My senses, spirit, mind, body, whatever, just picked them up, as if I was in a tour bus going along for a ride into an unexplored area. There was no thought process whatsoever. It is just a matter of tuning in. While tuned in, the images just appeared in my mind, similar to the imagination, but in a much different way. The differences were the ability to scan around, and clarity did not change. As so in imaginations, when trying to look at a big picture, but unable to maintain smaller details used to build that picture up. Also, I was able to contemplate my own set conjectures on these visions with no effect to the visions themselves. We all have a third eye, and mine was open that night. The strange thing about this third eye is its ability to make itself present in all of the worldly senses. I believe that if one were to go deep enough, they could detect all that is around them with sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. These hallucinogenic drugs definitely deserve more respect than what is given. Sure, they can be used to just trip out, which can very well produce desirable effects. However, it is way more fun, considering the vibes are right, and beneficial to use it for enlightening, religious, and meditative purposes. A prophecy? When I was watching TV, I turned to a news station. I think it was CNN. On TV was some Middle Eastern leader talking about the death of the terrorist Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in the bombing attacks. All of a sudden the sound tuned out. A voice came over shouting, and I quote, "Al-Zarqawi isn't really dead. He is hiding. He is hiding from the true catastrophe that is about to happen." Then it seemed to click back to the original sound. and someone else's voice was in the middle of a sentence. This trip took place on June 24th, 2006. I don't know why it said al-Zarqawi was still alive, seeing as how he was killed on June 6th. But I think the true catastrophe could relate to Israel, Lebanon, Hezbollah crisis that started on July 13th. Was my mind fucking with me? Was a prophecy spoken? Or had some other force fucked with me? Only time will answer these questions, seeing as how this report was completed on August 4th, 06. A rather early point to be jumping to conclusions. And I can't update.